In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all are steps on the path of omniscience. May these arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this. I hope Maitreya doesn't take offense that we're supplicating a different bodhisattva here. Do you think that he might be bothered by that? No, I don't think so either. Good evening and welcome. So tonight we have three pieces to go through. And the first is this Dharani of inconceivability or non-conceptualityness, something like that. And I included it because Karl Brunhölzl included it in his book, Mining for Wisdom, where he translates this text by Maitreya, along with a commentary he has three commentaries, Vasubandhu, Gorampa, and then a very long one by Rangjung Dorje. He says I asked him, why did he include this text in his book? He says the reason for including this text is that it is an important source for the Dharma Dharmatava Vibhaga. So it's sort of a sutra source for Maitreya's text. And it's also quoted frequently in the works of the third karma by Rangjung Dorje, serving as the main source for the relinquishment of the four conceptions about factors to be relinquished, remedies, suchness, and the fruition to be attained. So he says, maybe I wish I could figure out how to use my computer.
Derek, is it a sutra?
It is.
Yes.
It is a sutra, which is why it begins, thus have I heard. Sorry for the delay here. So Karl says the reason for including this text it is an important source for the Dharma Dharmatava Vibhaga. It's also quoted frequently in the works of the third Karmapa, serving as the main source for the relinquishment of the four conceptions about factors to be relinquished. So I'm not sure if the four conceptions are factors to be relinquished, remedies, suchness, and the fruition to be attained. Or if it's the four factors, I should ask him this or figure this out. Anyway, presumably we should be able to figure that out by the text as we go through it. The presentation of the five paths includes the second path, the path of preparation, or joining, which joins the path of accumulation, where we accumulate the good qualities that are needed for the longer progression on the path, in particular merit and shamatha and vipassana. And in particular, we cultivate shamatha on the path of accumulation, on the path of preparation. We in particular focus on vipassana and the cultivation of prajna, transcendent wisdom, which ultimately is conjoined with shamatha on the path of preparation, and together they result in the direct, i.e. non-conceptual experience of the true nature of reality, presented usually as emptiness. And that culmination is the path of seeing. And on the path of preparation, there's a series of four conceptions about the apprehender and the apprehended that are overcome. It's very hard to find information on these four conceptions. Carl has a little section on it in one of his Parting of the Clouds books, which is on the Abhisamaya Alamkara, one of the texts of Maitreya. But it appears that this text, Dharma Dharmatava Bhanga, has a lot about apprehender, apprehended, and therefore focusing on that path of preparation. And I believe that's what Carl is talking about here, but I will clarify that with him. So I thought I would, again, let's see, screen share. We'll go through this Dharani. Can you guys see the Dharani on screen? Okay, so it has titles that are set in the midst of the text. And I'm not sure who did that. I don't think Carl says who does that. Thus have I heard. So that's the key tip-off that it's considered to be a sutra. So there's said to be 12 different types of sutras. That includes things like Jataka tales, or 12 types of teachings of the Buddha. And it includes Jataka tales, and it includes Dharanis, and many other things. And Dharanis range from texts like this that actually sound sort of like a teaching situation, the record of a teaching situation. And then on the other end of the spectrum, Dharanis literally sometimes are just a string of syllables, much like long mantras that are to be repeated. And in the early tradition, starting from the early tradition of Buddhism, so-called early tradition, Dharanis were used as a way of as sort of magical mantras to help one not get sick or get better, not get attacked by snakes and other predatory animals and things like that. So Dharanis are an interesting class of texts in the Buddhist tradition. Thus have I heard one time when the Bhagawan was residing in Rajagriha, and we all know that Rajagriha is where the Vulture Peak mountain is from the Heart Sutra, where it says residing in Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain. Here he's in the palace that is the heart of the non-conceptual Dharmadhatu, superior to all three realms, which is not quite as down to earth as the Vulture Peak mountain. Vulture Peak being the name of an actual mountain that you can still visit to this day, together with a great gathering of big shoes, and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. He was in the company of the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Avikalpa, Bodhisattva Mahasattva, and so he lists all these great, great bodhisattvas. So Mahasattva bodhisattvas are bodhisattvas residing on the eighth bhumi and above. The eighth bhumi is sort of the major dividing line among the bhumis, between what are called the impure bhumis 1 to 7 and then the pure bhumis of 1 to 8. And the distinction is that there's two levels of the cognitive obscuration to enlightenment. The cognitive obscuration or obstruction to enlightenment. There's two obstructions. There's the cognitive and the klesha or emotional obstruction to enlightenment. And the cognitive one has two levels. It has the I can't remember quite the term that they use, the active cognitive obscuration of believing phenomena to have intrinsic reality, and then it has the residue of that, which is called basically duality, perceiving duality. And the idea is that even though in meditative equipoise, a bodhisattva experiences the path of seeing in meditative equipoise, and then when she arises from that samadhi, she once again experiences the phenomena of the world in a slightly dualistic way, without believing in the dualistic aspect of that experience or of this reality, but as if it is seen subject and object, because of the habit pattern from countless aeons of experiencing subject to object. And so that remains through bhumis 1 through 7, during which time the bodhisattva strives to familiarize, which is why the path of the fourth path is called the path of familiarization. It's often called meditation. It's not really a great translation for it, because it's really familiarizing oneself with the experience of the equipoise of samadhi, the experience of complete absolute truth, reality, and equipoise, and reconciling that with what one experiences outside of samadhi, due to the sort of hangover of the aeons of experiencing phenomena in a dualistic manner. And that wears off by the end of the seventh bhumi, and one no longer is sort of engaged in dualistic, that sort of dualistic pattern. And then from the eighth bhumi onward, there's just this sort of faint aroma of that subtle obstruction that remains. But bodhisattvas are said then to be pure bodhisattvas and are called Mahasattva bodhisattvas. Then, surrounded by a retinue, many hundreds of thousands, the Bhagawan, looking forward, taught the Dharma, beginning with the non-conceptuality of all phenomena in the Mahayana. Sort of starting with the profound teaching of the emptiness of all phenomena, in the sense of all phenomena being beyond conception. Then the Bhagawan, having looked at the retinue of all the assembled bodhisattvas, said to the bodhisattva sons of good family, you must retain the dharani, called entering non-conceptuality, which would be sort of like saying you must continually practice and pass on and propagate the meditation upon the way of experiencing the true nature of reality, by pointing out its aspect as being beyond conception. Those bodhisattva mahasattvas who retain the dharana, called entering non-conceptuality, accomplish the Buddha dharmas very swiftly, and always progress in a distinguished manner. This is like what we talk about as the threefold purity of the Bodhisattva, where until you can have some genuine level of experience of the emptiness of doer, um, what's of the performer, what's performed, and the recipient of that activity, as in like the active generosity, the giver, the given, and the one receiving the gift of dharma or materiality or fearlessness, then those are not paramitas. They don't transcend samsara. But when one does it within the realm of the three purities, then one progresses very quickly, which would be similar to saying within the um, retention of the dharani, entering non-conceptuality. Then the Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the Renyu, whose name was Avikalpa Prabhasa, rose from his seat, put his upper robe over one shoulder. So this is a traditional thing that monks do when they would address a teacher or make a formal, or when they teach themselves. Place his right kneecap on the ground, as we do when we take the Bodhisattva vow, which probably most all of us have done, is you kneel on one knee, bowed in the direction of the Bhagavan with joined palms, and said to the Bhagavan, Bhagavan, please teach us this Dharma, Dharani of not entering non-conceptuality, which Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, upon having heard, will retain, read, mentally engage in a proper manner, and teach widely to others. Making the retinue into a proper vessel. So turning the retinue into a boat or a ship. Just kidding. When he had spoken in that way, the Bhagavan answered, why is there? The Bhagavan answered, therefore, Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, listen well and mentally engage properly, and I will explain the dharani of entering non-conceptuality. Very well, Bhagavan, said the Bodhisattvas. They listened to the Bhagavan. The Bhagavan said the following to them. Taking one stance, O sons of good family. So the fact that it says like sons instead of sons and daughters may indicate that it's a sort of early Mahayana sutra. I have this faint idea that later Mahayana sutras began to use sons and daughters, so it wasn't so male chauvinistically oriented. Here Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, here the Dharma related to non-conceptuality, place their intention on non-conceptuality, and then relinquish all characteristics of conceptuality. As the first of these characteristics, they relinquish all characteristics of the conceptions about a nature, that is, about either apprehender or apprehended. These characteristics of the conceptions about a nature here consist of the characteristics with regard to contaminated entities. So contaminated entities would be a reference, on the one hand, to the the second mark of existence, which is one of the four aspects of the truth of suffering, which is that all contaminated phenomena are suffering. When we talk about the three marks of what we call the three or four marks of existence, we often say all phenomena, all compounded phenomena. Well, we learn them as like all things are impermanent, all things are suffering, and all things are egoless. But the more technical, accurate presentation of these is that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Conditioned, compounded phenomena are impermanent. Conditioned phenomena, phenomena that are produced by causes and conditions, are programmed to not last. Phenomena that are composed of different parts are programmed not to be permanent. All phenomena that are contaminated are suffering. And the idea is all phenomena that are contaminated with the disease of belief in a self are suffering. It's really the very precise way of understanding that second mark of um, existence. And so his use of this term contaminated would be a reference to that framework of contaminated by belief in a self. So they relinquish all characteristics of the conceptions about a nature, that is, about either apprehender or apprehended. These characteristics of the conceptions about a nature here consist of the characteristics with regard to contaminated entities. These contaminated entities are the five appropriating skandhas. And so the five appropriating, why are they called appropriating? Sometimes they're called appropriated. Here, um, Professor Brunholzl, Kempo Brunholzl, has used appropriating, indicating that the skandhas appropriate karmic residue. When it's talked about as appropriated, then we're referring to the fact that the ascension being a person mistakenly takes the skandhas as being of or to a self, and thereby appropriates the skandhas. Are the five appropriating skandhas, that is the appropriating skandha form, a feeling of discrimination, a formation of consciousness. How are those characteristics of conceptions about a nature relinquished? What becomes perceptible by way of being an appearance is relinquished through not mentally engaging in it. So we don't relinquish by like renouncing or using an antidote or using logical reasoning. We relinquish the conceptions of characteristics by not engaging with them, which is just the basic, is identical to the basic instruction that we have in meditation practice, where we don't follow thoughts, we don't pursue them, we don't investigate them, we don't try to stop them, we just don't engage them in the Mahamudra system. Once the bodhisattvas have gradually relinquished these characteristics about of the conceptions about a nature, the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze the remedies, which are other than the former are the characteristics of a nature, which are other than the former occur and become perceptible by way of being appearances. So it seems like then remedies appear. They consist of the following: the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze generosity, ethics. So the six paramitas appear as sort of remedies for the continuing, for the still remaining fixation upon a self. Patience, vigor, dhyana, and prajna, which operate either by way of analyzing a nature, by way of analyzing qualities, or by way of analyzing an essence. The bodhisattvas also relinquish these characteristics of the conceptions that analyze the remedies through not mentally engaging in them. Once the bodhisattvas have relinquished those characteristics of the conceptions about the remedies, the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze true reality, which are other than the former, i.e. remedies, occur or become evident. So it's sort of like this progressive process of going through different layers of conceptuality, occur and become perceptible by way of being appearances. They consist of the following: the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze emptiness, the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze suchness, the true end, signlessness, the ultimate, and the Dharma Dhatu, which operate either by way of analyzing specific characteristics, by way of analyzing qualities, or by way of analyzing an essence. The bodhisattvas also relinquish these characteristics of the conceptions that analyze true reality through not mentally engaging in them. So, a very subtle differentiation going on here, where initially the first one is sort of like the belief in the self of persons, and then it seems like we go on to overcoming the self of phenomena through these remaining ones. Remedies, those that analyze true reality, and then the next one, once the bodhisattvas have relinquished those characteristics of the conceptions that analyze reality, the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze attainment, which are other than those conceptions that analyze reality, and the remedies occur and become perceptible by way of being appearances. Which is how the one before them became apparent. And the one before that, so they become appearances. Okay, so it does seem like the first one was focused on the self of persons, and the remaining ones are on appearances, which are phenomena, and overcoming the belief in the self of phenomena.
And would you say all of this addresses cognitive obscurations as opposed to prejudice?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. They consist of the following: the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze the attainment of the first bhumi, up through the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze the attainment of the 10th bhumi, the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze the attainment of the poised readiness for the dharma of non-arising, um, for the attainment of prophecy, the attainment of the purity of the Buddha realms, the attainment of maturing beings, the attainment of the empowerment, the attainment of the knowledge of all aspects, which operate either by way of analyzing specific characteristics, by way of analyzing qualities, or by way of analyzing an essence. The bodhisattvas also relinquish these characteristics of the conceptions that analyze attainment through not mentally engaging in them. So trying to figure out what they're talking about here. For one, this phrase, characteristics of the conceptions, remains a sort of tongue twister that seems a bit repetitive. It seems like it could be more simple. It would be simpler to just say they consist of the following. The Mary Beth.
Is this like skillful means? And are we supposed to understand it as a progression?
It's definitely a progression, which I was just about to go through, but skillful means, I don't know, I think, I mean, you could say on the one hand that the whole path is skillful means. The way of presenting the path in a progressive way is skillful means.
I guess I mean those specifically that you do something until it's not useful anymore and something else is presented to you, so you have to let go of that prior step, and then you have to engage with this new appearance and go through those same steps again, but then you have to let that go as well. Like each layer of thinking you've realized something, you sort of have to let go because you realize that it's still.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it does have, it's not um, a major aspect of it, but it does appear that that's what's it's sort of like each stage is sort of taking care of what was left over from the prior stage, continuing along the way and going deeper. I think what you're referring to is this idea that each stage of the path leaves its own residue, and then the next stage sort of has to clean up that. It overcomes certain things, but it creates like a residue. So if we look at this one, it says overcoming. For the one before first, sorry, had the second one, the remedies, had the 6 paramitas, right? So we got up to the 6th paramita, which technically should be the 6 bhumis. And then we had a list of phenomena that are fairly synonymous. True reality, emptiness, suchness, the true end, true cessation, sometimes translated as true cessations or complete cessation, signlessness, which is the second door of liberation, the first being emptiness, the ultimate, the Dharma Dhatu. And so all of those are somewhat synonymous. So, sort of conceptions about the absolute nature of reality. And then the first bhumi up to the 10th, this here, the attainment of the prophecy, is linked to the 8th bhumi. The 8th bhumi is called aspiration. The paramita is aspiration, and the name of the bhumi has something to do with prophecy. And the idea is that when one attains the 8th bhumi, having overcome the impure bhumis, one's attainment of Buddhahood is guaranteed. And various Buddhas come and visit you and describe to you the different features of your own Buddhahood that you will attain. So they prophesize your own Buddhahood. They will tell you what your name will be, when it will be, and different aspects of your life. So that places it like right on the 8th bhumi, and you could say that the one before, the Dharma of non-arising, is maybe the 7th bhumi, and then the 9th bhumi has to do with strength or power, capability. Maybe that's the attainment of purity of the Buddha realms. And then maybe the 10th bhumi is attainment of maturing sentient beings. And then the 11th, the Vajra-like samadhi, is in the Vajrayana tradition, enlightenment happens through the receipt of empowerment, that the other Tathagatas, other Buddhas visit you and give you an Vajrayana empowerment. Then it says, up through the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze the attainment of the knowledge of all aspects, which is the knowledge of a Dharmakaya Buddha, which operate either by way of analyzing the specific characteristics, qualities, or an essence, which are the 3 ways of looking at phenomena. Anyway, once Bodhisattva Mahasattvas have relinquished all aspects of the characteristics of conceptions, do not mentally engage in them, they strive hard for the dhatu of non-conceptuality. Interestingly, similar to Dharma Dhatu, saying that there's a dhatu of non-conceptuality, which is sort of a contradiction in terminology, but it's the Buddhist way of sort of creating a stage or an experience that in this case would be not marked by, but have the main aspect as being non-conceptuality. Though they have not yet made contact with the dhatu of non-conceptuality, there is the proper samadhi through which they will make contact with that dhatu. So it's a little bit unclear where the bodhisattvas are at this point. It sounded like they were fully enlightened. Now it sounds like, well, maybe they're still aspiring towards that. Entering the dhatu of non-conceptuality by virtue of pursuing that correct practice through reliance, by virtue of pursuing it through familiarization, by virtue of pursuing it through enhancement, and by virtue of pursuing it through correct mental engagement, they make contact with the dhatu of non-conceptuality in spontaneous and effortless manner and progressively purify it. These four sound familiar: reliance, familiarization, enhancement, and correct mental engagement, but I can't quite place them. The characteristics of that dhatu of non-conceptuality, where it is, how far it takes, how big it is, and so forth. Sons of good family, for what reason is the dhatu of non-conceptuality called non-conceptuality? Is due to being beyond all conceptions that analyze, due to being beyond all conceptions in terms of demonstrating and illustrating, due to being beyond all conceptions in terms of sense faculties, in terms of objects, due to being beyond all conceptions in terms of cognizance, and due to not being the locus of any afflictive, secondary afflictive, and cognitive obscurations. So here we go. Beyond all conceptions in terms of cognizance, and due to not being the locus of afflictive, secondary afflictive, and cognitive obscurations. So here we're given three obscurations, but the first two, afflictive and secondary, are of the same flavor. And the kleshas, when they are categorized in the mental formations, there's primary kleshas and secondary kleshas. So presumably this is what's being referred to as the klesha varana, or klesha, obstacle to enlightenment, obscuration in the cognitive. Therefore, the dhatu of non-conceptuality is called non-conceptual. What is non-conceptuality? It is ungraspable, indemonstrable, unfounded, without appearance, non-cognizance, and without base. Unfounded is not used in the sense that we often use it in English as being unsupportable by reasoning or experience, but it has more of an ontological sense here. The signs of having entered it through the non-conceptual wisdom that is not different from what is to be known. So the union of subject and object, the non-conceptual wisdom that is not different from what is to be known. Self-reflective wisdom. Bodhisattva Mahasattvas who abide in the dhatu of non-conceptuality see all phenomena as being like the center of space. What is the center of space like? It's well known for being unfindable. You can't find the center of space. Through the wisdom that is attained subsequent to that non-conceptual wisdom, they see all phenomena as being like illusions, mirages, dreams, optical illusions, echoes, reflections of the moon and water, and magical creations. This appears to be the two aspects of wisdom, seeing the absolute nature of reality and seeing the relative reality as being illusion-like. The benefits of this non-conceptuality are, therefore, they attain the vast mastery over dwelling in great bliss. They attain the vast, great excellence of mind. They attain vast, great prajna and wisdom. They attain the vast mastery over great teaching, and they get a 20% discount at the retailer of their choice. Its activity at all times, they will be able to promote all aspects of the welfare of sentient beings for effortless Buddha activities uninterrupted. Pointing out this dhatu of non-conceptuality through an example, sons of good family, it is thus assumed that beneath very hard and solid, I think a very hard and solid rock mountain, there is a great treasure full of all kinds of precious substances, that is, various great radiant precious substances that are wish-fulfilling jewels, and consist of precious silver, gold, gems, that are the cores of stone. When a person who wishes for a great treasure comes by, then a person comes by, another person who knows about that great treasure through supernatural knowledge says to the first person, "Oh, sir, beneath that very hard and solid rock mountain there is a great treasure full of radiant precious substances." So anyway, we have this analogy, right, of like levels of precious substances, under which is the final one, wish-fulfilling jewels of the best one is the wish-fulfilling jewels, right? Okay, so you have to dig the silver, you have to dig out the gold, you have to keep digging. The precious wish-fulfilling jewel will be found. Through obtaining that great treasure of the precious wish-fulfilling jewel, you will be rich, having great wealth and great possessions, and be endowed with the power of accomplishing your welfare and that of others. The wish-fulfilling jewel is, just like the name says, it's a jewel that fulfills whatever wish you have. You just have to wish for something and it appears. So that's a pretty handy thing to have. Thus, O sons of good family, this example is given in order to make you understand the following meaning as best as possible. Very hard and solid rock mountain means the kinds of formation that consist of afflictiveness, kleshas, and being engrossed in duality cognitive. A great treasure of the precious wish-fulfilling jewel below refers to the dhatu of non-conceptuality. Sort of like the alia. It reminds me of the alia, the ground, the base underneath phenomena. The person who wishes for the great treasure, the precious wish-fulfilling jewel, refers to a bodhisattva mahasattva. The one who knows about that great treasure through supernatural knowledge refers to the arhat, who is the Tathagata, the completely perfect Buddha. And the juxtaposition of the term arhat with Buddha might be a little surprising, but in the sutras, in much of the early tradition, the Buddha is referred to as the great arhat. What has the nature of rock refers to the characteristics of the conceptions about a nature, and digging means not mentally engaging. That's an interesting one. Not mentally engaging means digging. You would think it'd be not digging, but anyway, rock that appears to be silver stands for the characteristic conceptions that analyze remedies. The gold is the conception about emptiness. The various gems are the conceptions about attainment. And the wish-fulfilling jewel is the actual dhatu of non-conceptuality. Sons of good family, through deducing this example, the entering into non-conceptuality should be understood. The means, sons of good family, how then do bodhisattvas and mahasattvas who examine the characteristics of conceptions as taught above enter the dhatu of non-conceptuality? Here, sons of good family, bodhisattva and mahasattvas who dwell in the dhatu of non-conceptuality, when the characteristics of the conceptions about a nature of form become perceptible for them, examine as follows. To entertain the notion, my form is to entertain conceptions. To entertain the notion, the form of others is to entertain conceptions. To entertain the notion, this is form, is to entertain conceptions. Form is arising, ceasing, afflicted or purified is to entertain conceptions. Form does not exist. Form neither exists by its own, by a nature of its own, nor does it exist as a cause, nor does it exist as a result, nor does it exist as karma, nor does it exist as linkage, nor does it exist as a process, is to entertain conceptions. To entertain the notion, form is mere cognizance, is to entertain conceptions, which is a reference to the mind only, the idea of mind only. To entertain the notion, just as form does not exist, so does the cognizance that appears as form does not exist, is to entertain conceptions. That's sort of the Madhyamaka step, saying that cognizance does not appear, does not exist, and that also is a conception. Therefore, sons of good family, Bodhisattva and Mahasattvas neither observe form, nor do they observe the cognizance that appears as form, the mind that appears as form. However, it is not that cognizance is utterly and completely non-existent. Any other phenomena apart from cognizance is not observable. So cognizance is not completely and utterly non-existent. Anything apart from cognizance can't be known. All we can know is what we know. Sort of tautology. This cognizance is not perceived as the lack of existence, nor is the lack of existence perceived apart from cognizance. It has no nature, therefore it doesn't appear one way or another. It is not that the lack of existence of the cognizance appears as form, and that cognizance are perceived, and that it is not that the lack of existence of the cognizance that appears as form, and that cognizance are perceived as being one, nor are they perceived as being different. The mind and what the mind perceives are not one or different. It is not that the lack of existence of that cognizance is perceived as an existent. So we don't view that the absence of existence is an object of knowledge, nor is it perceived as a non-existence. So here we're going through the subtleties of the absence of apprehender and apprehended. Sons of good family, what is now conceived by any aspects of all those conceptions, the dhatu of non-conceptuality is not perceived either. Sons of good, so even the dhatu of non-conceptuality does not have any existential status. Sons of good family, this is the way of entering the dhatu of non-conceptuality, by not thinking that it exists, which is different than thinking that it doesn't exist. Not thinking that it doesn't exist is different than thinking that it doesn't exist. Sons of good family, this is the way of entering it. In this way, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas dwell in the dhatu of non-conceptuality, and the same is to be applied to feeling, discrimination, formation, consciousness, likewise to the paramitas, and likewise to everything from emptiness and so on, up through the knowledge of all aspects. Sons of good family, bodhisattva, mahasattvas, when the characteristics of the conceptions that analyze the knowledge of all aspects become perceptible for them, examine them as follows. To entertain the notion, my knowledge of all aspects is to entertain conceptions. To entertain the notion, the knowledge of all aspects of others is to entertain conceptions, and so forth. This is the knowledge of all aspects. The knowledge of all aspects is to be attained. The knowledge of all aspects relinquishes all afflictive and cognitive obscurations. The knowledge of all aspects is what is utterly purified. The knowledge of all aspects is arising, ceasing, afflicted, and purified. The knowledge of all aspects does not exist. The knowledge of all aspects neither exists by nature of its own, nor does it exist as a cause, nor does it exist as a result, nor does it exist as karma, nor does it exist as linkage. Linkage is that which links the present to the past in terms of karmic continuity, and the past to the future, nor does it exist as a process. It's to entertain conceptions. The knowledge of all aspects is mere cognizance, is to entertain conceptions. To entertain the notion, just as the knowledge of all aspects does not exist, so does the cognizance that appears as the knowledge of all aspects not exist. is to entertain conceptions. Therefore, just as Bodhisattva and Mahasattvas do not observe the knowledge of all aspects, so do they not observe the cognizance that appears as that knowledge of all aspects. However, it is not that the cognizance that is the knowledge of all aspects is utterly and completely non-existent. Any other phenomena apart from the cognizance that is the knowledge of all aspects is not observable. This cognizance is not perceived as the lack of existence, nor is the lack of existence perceived apart from that cognizance. It is not that the lack of existence of the cognizance that appears as the knowledge of all aspects and that cognizance are perceived as being one, nor are they perceived as being different. It is not that the lack of existence of that cognizance is perceived as an existent, nor is it perceived as a non-existent. Sons of good family, what is not conceived by any aspects of all those conceptions, the dhatu of non-conceptuality is not perceived either. So the dhatu of non-conceptuality is what is not conceived by all aspects, by any aspects of those conceptions. Sons of good family, this is the way of entering that dhatu of non-conceptuality, and this is how they dwell in that realm. Sons of good family, great is the merit of attaining, writing, preserving, reading this Dharma specification. It is not equaled by giving away bodies as numerous as the sands of the river Ganga. So, in terms of merit, one of the most meritorious things is to give away one's own body. So saying that just by focusing on this sutra, you gain more merit than giving away infinite numbers of bodies over infinite lifetimes is quite a statement. It is not equaled by giving away worldly realms as numerous as the river Ganga that are full of gems, that are full of Buddha images. Then at that point the Bhagavan spoke the following two verses. The child of the victor who reflected on non-conceptuality in this Dharma by transcending conceptions difficult to traverse, gradually attain non-conceptuality. By virtue of that, bodhisattvas discover the bliss of non-conceptuality, which is peaceful, immovable, supreme, powerful, and equal, yet unequal. Equal, or not, let's see, yet unequal would be indicating that if they were unequal, then equal, which is equal yet unequal. Interesting phrase, equal yet unequal. When the Bhagavan had spoken these words, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avikalpa Prabhasa, the entire retinue in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. We're all familiar with that ending from the Heart Sutra.
Which this sounds a lot like, in a way. Though
it sure does.
Maybe like the Heart Sutra tripled or something. But it has very much similar quality.
The Heart Sutra on steroids.
Yeah, that's what I didn't want to say steroids, but yes. I'm not into steroids. But that's what it felt like. That's exactly what I was thinking as you were reading it.
That's great. Yeah. So let's dive into now, not my to-do list, but the 5 texts of Maitreya. And where am I? Here we go. Let's see, an overview. 5 Maitreya texts. So a quick glimpse first by Carl. I don't know how it happened, but I went searching for things on the 5 dharmas, somehow, or I don't know what I was doing, and I came upon this little text by Carl, and then it's unfindable, like it doesn't exist at this link. So I apologize for that. The five works of the Tibetan tradition ascribes to Maitreya resemble zip files, Carl's analogy of technology, which
Are
that
you
contain
just
all the
trying to
profound and vast
display
topics
this?
of the Buddhist teachings. Oh, is it not? Sorry, thank
No,
you so much.
no.
I should have noticed that. Look, hi, Lindsay. Okay, so tonight and next week we'll dive into the five texts through a very short list of them by Carl, and then a more detailed presentation of their contents. And it's a little bit pedantic. It's just like lists of things, and but the idea is it's a way of beginning to appreciate the profundity of these texts and sort of what a major advancement, a major statement they were, and a major turning point in the Buddhist tradition, because like basically a lot of things changed after these texts appeared. So we have these five texts: the ornament of clear realization, which comments on the emptiness taught in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. So the Prajnaparamita Sutras are vast. There's many, many, many of them. There's probably like, I don't know, 50 different Prajnaparamita Sutras, ranging from the Heart Sutra, or even shorter, up to one in 100,000 shlokas, which are 4-line stanzas. And so this text, the Ornament of Clear Realization, is an unbelievable summary of the meaning of that diverse body of literature in a profound organization that we'll see shortly. Comments on that emptiness taught in the Prajnaparamitas, what happens in the minds of bodhisattvas familiarizing themselves with emptiness on the paths and bhumis. The ornament of Mahayana Sutras. So some call it the ornament for Mahayana Sutras, some call it the ornament of Mahayana Sutras. The idea is that it's sort of um, celebrating the amazing feat of the Mahayana Sutras by pulling out phrases, topics, points from a huge array of different Mahayana Sutras and arranging them topically. So it's like a compendium of sort of a topical compendium of the essence of all the Mahayana Sutras. Nagarjuna also has a text called the Sutra Samujjaya, as does Shantideva has a text called the Sutra Samujjaya. So this is not a unique endeavor by Maitreya, but it's an outstanding one. It's a synopsis of all topics not covered by the ornament, and the last text, the ultimate continuum of the Mahayana, Uttara Tantra. Distinction between middle extremes explains the vast paths of all three yanas, three being Shravaka, Parteka, Buddha, Buddhist, Bodhisattva yanas, emphasizing the view of Yogacara, including the Yogacara middle way and the distinctive features of the Mahayana. So what Carl just enters here into the discussion is the idea that Maitreya and Asanga provide a further explanation of the middle way that the Mahayana is famous for, whereas Nagarjuna is the most famous for presenting the middle way, Madhyamaka, and these texts by Maitreya and Asanga are often considered like either on the one hand an aberration of what Nagarjuna presented, or they're presented as describing the vast complexity of the bodhisattva path and qualities and stages and so forth of the bodhisattva path, but not always characterized as presenting a further way of understanding the middle way. And that's sort of the point of studying these texts, is to resurrect that notion, which I think as you study these texts you will see is clearly evident, that they are presenting a further way of understanding the emptiness presented in the Prajnaparamita Sutras that was begun by Nagarjuna but not completed by Nagarjuna. Some traditions view Nagarjuna as being the beginning and the end, the middle and the end of that project. But the texts of Maitreya are considered to be further developments in the understanding of that, in the essence of the Mahayana path, the understanding of the true nature of reality. And this text in particular, plus even more in particular, the text for this course, distinction between phenomena and their nature, discuss the difference between samsara confusion and the liberating power of non-conceptual wisdom, the heart essence of all profound sutras. So this text is the heart essence of all profound sutras. The Ornament of Clear Realization is a very condensed presentation of the Bodhisattva's understanding of emptiness. Mahayana Sutras is a vast presentation. Distinction between middle and extremes presents a sort of Mahayana Abhidharma. I'm surprised Carl doesn't say that here. Others characterize it that way. And then Dharma Dharmatava Bhanga, this fourth text, is the essence. It really distills it down into an essence. Now, when we hear the word essence, we often think, oh, that's great, it's like just right to the point, short and sweet and like very pithy. Unfortunately, in most of the Buddhist tradition, when they say this is the heart essence, it also means hard to understand because it's highly abbreviated. Which is why we need commentaries. Finally, the ultimate continuum of the Mahayana is a general commentary on Buddha nature and represents a bridge between Sutra and Tantra, the famous text that presents the Buddha nature in great detail and at great length. These 5 texts are mainly based on Prajnaparamita classical teachings of Yogacara, which are not identical with what is called mind-only school. So this is the view of those traditions that cleave towards the third turning of the wheel of the Dharma of the Buddha, such as the Kagyu Nyingma in particular, unlike those that cleave towards the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma of the Buddha, in particular the Gelugpa and to some extent the Sakya, who view Yogacara as simply an alternative name for what is known as mind-only school or tradition or texts. However, our tradition distinguishes Yogacara as being the true presentation of the Dharma by Maitreya and Asanga and Vasubandhu, and not how it was somewhat understood differently by Indian masters after them, and that is what we refer to as the mind-only school. And the instructions on Buddha nature. Different Tibetan masters voiced all kinds of opinions about these texts, representing the views of different schools, such as mind-only Yogacara Madhyamaka or Zhendong, Tibetan invention. However, as far as one's practice goes, says Trungpa Rinpoche, the tutor of the 17th Karmapa, it is necessary to determine, even in the Madhyamaka view, that appearances are nothing but mind. So he's going to repeat the 4 stages of Vipassana, which turn out to be identical to the 4 yogas of Mahamudra and the 4 pointing outs of Mahamudra. Appearances are nothing but mind. Mind is empty, and to realize mind's emptiness in meditation, which is an interesting way of characterizing the third of what are usually a 4-fold scheme. That emptiness is not sort of a blank voidness, but is something that's experienced. It's According to the so-called mind-only school, that mind is ultimately existent, but nothing like that is said anywhere in the Maitreya texts. So that's the Gelugpa tradition. It says that the mind-only school holds the mind to be ultimately existent. When we go through the different schools in Gelugpa tradition text, that's the characterization that we are given. And the Maitreya and the Sangha texts are lumped in to mind only. But as Carl is saying, there's nowhere do these texts say that mind is ultimately existent. So from that point of view, it can be said that all 5 texts belong to Madhyamaka in general. In particular, distinction between phenomena and their nature, the last 2, and the ultimate continuum, present the view of the Jetong Madhyamaka school and are also considered to be foundations for Mahamudra. So I've been planning and working on a course on the development of the Zhentong tradition for some time, along with my friend Chris Wilcox, that we're hoping to present a year from now. In any case, Maitreya's works are crucial and celebrated because they provide a comprehensive overview of all the essential elements of Mahayana motivation, view, meditation, conduct, and fruition. Being classical Indian works, they're not exactly light bedtime reading, but together with their commentaries, the extractors of the zip files, so to speak, they paint a complete and detailed picture of Mahayana Buddhism. Now, different from the above traditional order of these 5 texts, a more accessible way for us to approach these texts is to start with the ultimate continuum. The easiest one discusses the nature of our mind as the very basis of everything on the Buddhist path. Then the distinction between phenomena and their nature enables us to discriminate ignorance and its manifestations from wisdom as the motor of the path to liberation. And then the other text, the Middle and Extremes, explains the profound middle way and the basic principles of the 3 yanas. The ornament fills in the details of the Bodhisattva's motivation, meditation, conduct, fruition. And finally, the ornament, clear realization, is the most complex text, combines the profundity of emptiness with the vastness of all paths and bhumis. So let's now go to there's a curiosity about these texts that it's helpful to know about. And let's see what's going on here. Oh, I screwed up. I mentioned this last time that 2 of the texts, uh, the ultimate continuum and the Dharma Dharmatava Banga, were hidden for centuries and then rediscovered by Maitripa. So then we have this somewhat long overview of the 5 texts by Karl Brunholzl that I shared the full text of. It has a very pretty cover. An overview of the 5 texts of Maitreya, The Sun Rays That Opened the Lotus of the Mahayana by Karl Brunholzl, and I wanted to focus on the contents of the 5 Maitreya texts, which are crucial and celebrated because they provide a comprehensive overview of all the essential elements of Mahayana motivation, view, meditation, conduct, and fruition in a very concise form. We have the same verbiage. So some of this, I see, the other text was extracted from this. The Abhisamaya Lanka are the first of the 5 texts in their traditional order. The ornament of clear realization, Abhisamaya Alamkara. So Alamkara means ornament, and in this case, Samaya means realization. It doesn't mean a vow, as it often means in Vajrayana. And abhi means higher or pure or transcendent, as in abhidharma, higher dharma. So we have higher or clear realization. Often it's translated as higher realization. Clear is good. It's a digest of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, blending the message of the Prajnaparamita Sutras with Yogacara templates of different levels of afflictive and cognitive obscurations. These are the two obscurations to enlightenment. Afflictive is a translation of klesha, so the various kleshas, starting with the three roots of aggression, attachment, and stubbornness or stupidity. Various paths as their remedies, such as the five paths, and the qualities of Buddhahood as their fruition. Thus this text, Abhismayalankara, comments on both emptiness, which is the object or the explicit meaning of this text, and the Prajnaparamita text, as taught in those sutras, and what happens in the minds of bodhisattvas who familiarize with this emptiness on the paths and bhumis, which is the hidden meaning. So there's an explicit meaning of this text, the emptiness, and then the realization of those who understand that emptiness, which is the hidden meaning. Being the most complex text among the five, it combines the profundity of emptiness with the vastness of the paths of the three yanas. The Abhismayalankara is basically a giant table of contents, or a condensation, listing the contents for the Prajnaparamita Sutras in 25,000 lines, which is the second largest, the largest being 100,000. But this one focuses primarily on the 25,000 line text, which apparently presents all of these 8 topics that are said to be the extent of the topics presented in all the Prajnaparamita Sutras. Other Prajnaparamita Sutras present some of the 8 topics, but not all of them. But it does it, the Prajnaparamita Sutras does it in no order, almost like intentionally in no logical order, no progressive order. No, it's not an alphabetical order. It's just like hodgepodge. And so it becomes a little bit mind-numbing and very hard to sort of condense and understand the essence of those sutras. Whereas this text does it in a like a 30-page verse text, which is sort of miraculous. It's really quite an amazing text. This is reflected in the structure, which consists of the 8 chapters or topics, the 8 clear realizations, which branch into 70 points, which are further subdivided into 1,200 subpoints. If you want to cut hairs, the knowledge of all aspects, sarvakara jnata, and like all of these are like not quite evident what these are. The knowledge of the path, that sounds like, okay, how do we get there? The all knowledge, okay, that sounds like supreme wisdom. The full realization of all, of all aspects. The culminating clear realization, very similar. The serial clear realization, so if you're a serial realizer, which seems to be a way of talking about those of us, or the fact that basically everybody progresses on the path in a progressive manner, and then at a certain point attain enlightenment in an instant, which is the clear realization in a single instant. And so there's different places in the teachings of the Buddha where they talk about those who possess in a linear manner and those who like leap around and those who have realization instantly. And the Abhisamayalankara sort of says everybody basically goes through both, even those who experience realization in a sudden manner, they've already done the linear progression, and then the ultimate fruition is the Dharmakaya. Among these topics, 1 to 3 present what is to be known and realized on the path. 4 and 7 are the four kinds of through 7 are the four kinds of training or practices as the means to realize 1 through 3, and 8 is the fruition. The knowledge of all aspects refers to a Buddha's realization of all aspects, signs, characteristics of all phenomena as being unborn. This means being omniscient about all aspects of the true nature of phenomena and the entire variety of seeming appearances. And the obvious question is, does the Buddha know? What is it? What do they say? How many angels on top of a? No, that's a different one. The question is, does a Buddha actually know everything, or does the Buddha know the nature of everything? In itself, the knowledge of all aspects encompasses all the remaining 7 topics. However, through the knowledge of all aspects, though the knowledge of all aspects is in essence nothing but the fruition of the path, the text presents it in retrospect. That is through the 10 sets of causes on the Bodhisattva path that, when practically engaged in, eventually lead to the attainment of this knowledge and then also make up its intrinsic constituents. The 10 points of the knowledge of all aspects are, and the list is not very helpful. A lot of these, so I'll just skip through them quickly. It's just I thought good to get a general understanding of this. Bodhicitta, 10 instructions how to practice. Path of preparation, so that's the second path. So presumably these are the path of accumulation, the first 2. And then we have the path of preparation. Then we have the foundation of practice, i.e. the disposition, the focal, little typo, look at that, the focal object or vast scope of Mahayana, the aim, armor-like practice, ninefold, just like lists, not very helpful. The knowledge of the path means that while bodhisattvas travel through the 5 paths of the Mahayana, in particular through the 10 bhumis, they realize that all 3 types of paths are primordially unborn and without any nature of their own. This knowledge also refers to all the activities performed on the path and primarily serves as the remedy for the cognitive obscurations among the 2 obscurations, eventually resulting in the knowledge of all aspects. So overcoming the cognitive obscuration results in the wisdom of the knowledge of all aspects. The 11 points covered are not very helpful. The 5 causes, paths of Shravakas, Bodhisattvas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and then the path of seeing. We jump to the path of seeing, and then the 4th path of familiarization has a great deal of detail in its presentation, a number of different chapters. So this chapter of the Abhisamayalankara, or this topic, seems to focus on the 4th path, which is the path where one overcomes the 2 obscurations. The cognitive obscurations. The afflictive obscurations are overcome primarily on the path of preparation. The knowledge of entities, simply put, the knowledge of all entities refers to the full realization of Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddha, Arhats that serve as the remedy for the afflictive obscurations, being the knowledge that all entities are empty of a personal self. In the Abhisamayalankara, the current text, however, the full scope of the knowledge of entities refers to the perspective of bodhisattvas and Buddhas, which includes their being fully aware of both the antagonistic factors against enlightenment and the remedies in the context of the knowledge of the path. This means that from the perspective of the Bodhisattva path, the above realizations of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas make up the antagonistic factors discussed here, because these realizations still entail apprehending characteristics, while their remedies essentially consist of being free from apprehending them. Though the ways in which Shravakas Pratyeka Buddhas gain realizations are not to be cultivated by bodhisattvas as something that leads to their own specific realization on the path of the Mahayana, and in fact are to be relinquished by them, they nevertheless need to know these ways in order to help and teach beings who are attracted to those yanas. The 9 points are not very helpful. The 4th topic, complete training in all aspects, is the familiarization with all entities, path, aspects, including their respective knowledges, as being without nature, in order to realize the 3 knowledges, which I believe will come to. The Abhisamaya discusses the 173 aspects of all 3 knowledges in terms of practicing, realizing, and mastering them. The 11 points are not very helpful. The culminating training, the next part, is the culminating clear realization represents the highest form of familiarization with all entities. So familiarization doesn't mean like, oh, I'm familiar with everything in this house now that I've been here for so long, or something like that. But it means attuning one's being with the uncreated nature of reality. In other words, eliminating expectation of something that doesn't exist. Familiarization with all entities, paths, aspects as being without nature, which take place on the paths of preparation, seeing, and familiarization, respectively. In other words, it consists of the various levels of breakthrough experiences and their signs that manifest on the progressive paths of bodhisattvas as the results of their cultivating the complete training in all aspects. The 8 points are not terribly helpful, but on the path of preparation, the 2nd path, you have these 4 levels. Heat, which is like uh, described as like warming up to a situation, like getting revved up about understanding the nature of reality. So this is where vipassana is cultivated, in particular on these 2 levels, heat of the path and the level of peak, the peak of existence. And then shamatha comes back in at poised readiness and supreme dharma. Poised readiness is Carl's translation. Normally it's translated as patience or patient acceptance. It's an interesting way of translating that. The 4th stage is supreme dharma. So shamatha and vipassana are combined in these 2 stages. And that results in the path of seeing, which then gives way immediately or instantaneously to the path of familiarization. The path of seeing is said to be an instantaneous experience. So when we say the 5 paths, these are not, the word path is a misnomer. These are stages. The culminating training of the final uninterrupted path of the path of familiarization would be the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis, the pure bhumis, and then some mistaken notions. The serial training, in a general sense, is a brief overview of the sequential nature of the path, emphasizing the progressive stabilization of momentary culminating insights in terms of all the different aspects of the 3 knowledges. More specifically, it refers to being able to train in all these aspects in a very swift sequential manner due to one's great familiarity with them. The 13 points, 6 paramitas, recollecting. This is a very traditional list of recollecting, 6 recollections, 3, 6. Buddha, virtuous, merit, sangha, discipline or ethics, generosity, and the noble ones, and then training and realizing the nature of the lack of entity. So that's the serial training. That's the more progressive, down to earth training that we are progressing on. And the
Could you
term,
say something about, about the term recollecting here in this context?
yeah. So recollecting. is an odd term. It's like, where we like sitting down and remembering the qualities of the Buddha. There are these are presented as practices when you look at the 40 topics of meditation in the early tradition. They have these 10 kasinas, and then they have, I think, skandhas and ayatanas or something, and then they have the 6 recollections. And so these would be meditation topics. I think they're used here in a slightly different way, more like the 6 paramitas. The way we approach the 6 paramitas is as like an ongoing project. It's like an overall practice or way of approaching our life that we're constantly cultivating: generosity, discipline, patience, exertion, and so forth. And I think similarly, we're constantly trying to understand and appreciate what is a Buddha, understand and appreciate what is the accumulation of dharmas. How do we accumulate karma of these 3 types, and how does it manifest? What does it mean that there's a sangha of irreversible bodhisattvas, meaning they are on the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis? What does that mean? That there are beings that have overcome all of the obstructions such that there's no turning back, irreversible. Recollecting the importance of ethics, which is just like the 6 paramitas. So it's like a repetition of that, as is giving is the same, and then recollecting that there are this one is difficult, I think, for us Westerners, this idea that there are deities that appear in the world, and they don't in the West anymore. Just like hobbits and trolls and elves and dwarfs and witches and things like that don't really appear anymore because we've gotten too concrete. But this idea that there's a magic in the world, there's a magic that is accessible through understanding the way the karma works and the way that a non-conceptual mind can work with the law of karma. Anyway, that's my take on this recollecting, is that these are like ongoing practices, as opposed to in the early tradition, they're presented more as you would sit down and instead of meditating on the breath, you would meditate on the virtues of the Buddha and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. The instantaneous training. The instantaneous training of clear realization as single instant refers to the bodhisattva's simultaneous realization of all aspects of the 3 knowledges in the Vajra-like samadhi during the last moment of the 10th bhumi, which is immediately followed by the attainment of Buddhahood. This training is the natural culminating outflow of the one before, the serial training, in particular due to having cultivated all the paramitas in a sequential manner previously. In terms of its nature, the instantaneous training cannot be divided, but by way of its general characteristics, isolates or distinct capacities, it is fourfold. It's instantaneous in terms of not maturing. There's nothing that matures. I don't know, in terms of maturation, both of those is a little confusing. The lack of characteristics and in non-duality. Sort of hard to figure out what those are without going through them. And last topic is the Dharmakaya. Discusses the final fruition of the 4 trainings that went before, 3 through 7. 4 through 7, as the 3 or 4 kayas and their enlightened activity. The primary Buddha kaya is the Dharmakaya. In terms of its nature and purity, is referred to as the Swabhavaka kaya. In terms of its enjoyment of the Dharma, the Mahayana, as the Sambhoga kaya, and in terms of its manifesting in all kinds of pure and impure forms in various realms, as the Nirmanakaya. So he gives the more literal terms for these. Nirmanakaya. That's not a typo. That's intentional.
It even has an extra syllable. You notice there's an extra kikaya?
Yeah, some Bogakakaya. And that's the way it's presented in these early texts, and then the later tradition simplifies the terms, actually. Swabhavakaya, I think, becomes Swabhavakaya, right? Sometimes you see both. But you have the four Buddhakayas in this context. And the first one is sort of includes the others in some sense. Here you have the presentation of those four in detail. Sorry, of these three in detail, and then the enlightened activity. On some, the teachings of the three knowledges serve to cut through doubts about what is to be known and practiced, with the respectively higher ones among the three knowledges, including the lower. They are taught in order to know what is to be made a living experience at all entities. And this is the usual way of grouping entities into the three skills: skandhas, dhatus, and ayatanas. Paths and aspects are unborn. So you don't have to get them birthday presents. The four trainings are the means to make the three knowledges a living experience, and the Dharmakaya is taught as the outcome of these trainings. So it's a little boring going through these guys, huh? Let's see. Let's see if we can do one more tonight. Mahayana Sutra Alamkara. It's the longest of Maitreya's works. It's 864 verses. A synopsis of all of the topics of the Mahayana Sutras not covered by the previous text, the ornament of clear realization, and the last one, the ultimate continuum. In brief, the text presents the vast and profound details of Bodhisattva motivation, view, meditation, conduct, fruition. Interesting, he keeps repeating that scheme, which is a nice scheme. Usually we say view, meditation, and action or something, but it's nice to flesh it out in this way and include motivation as an initial, essential factor, thereby having four aspects. Sorry, five. I used to be able to count. 21 chapters of this text, the authenticity of the Mahayana, which was for many centuries something that they had to um, deal with. People casting aspersions at the Mahayana, the three refuges, the divisions, the types of Gotra. So Gotra and Garba are often confused. And it's a very subtle distinction when we talk about the Garba of a Tathagata, as in Tathagata Garba or Sugata Garba. That's Buddha nature. The Gotra is the dispositions that um, that different beings have towards that Garba. All beings have the Garba, but beings have different levels of readiness for the path to awaken that Garba, that Buddha nature. And so there's in the early tradition of the Mahayana, there were different versions of the Gotra. So Maitreya discusses those. Bodhicitta, the essential topic, the Bodhisattva practice generally, uh, the characteristics of true reality. It's always fun. Identitylessness. It's not a very long chapter, and how to enter into that realization of true reality. The powers of the bodhisattvas, they can do all sorts of magical feats, signs of maturity, the Buddha's awakening or omniscience in detail through its characteristics, the notion of fundamental change, its activity, the profundity and perfection of the uncontaminated Dharmadhatu, its many forms of mastery through the fundamental change of the eight consciousnesses, the three Buddhakayas, the four Buddha wisdoms and their cause, the manner of attaining Buddhahood, and the unity of the enlightened activity of all Buddhas. We should read this chapter someday. That sounds like a really good chapter. The different types of confidence, obscurations, benefits, and fruitions. Investigating the Dharma in various ways through investigating the focal object. What is the object of Dharma, the Dharma itself? How do we engage in it? What is true reality? What are the nature of true reality as being illusion-like? What are knowable objects? I don't know. afflicted and purified phenomena, all these different things. Cognizance, mind only. Characteristics, what is a characteristic? What is liberation? What does the lack of nature mean? What is single jhana? So what the Mahayana does at this point is it says, well, there's these three different paths and of beings, Stravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, and traditionally only Bodhisattvas turned into Buddhas, uh, and only one every aeon. And then there came this idea that, well, that's not really true. That's an expedient, provisional teaching. Really, the ultimate definitive teaching is that everybody's going to become a Buddha. So there's really one jhana, the Buddha jhana. And the last topic is how to nourish the Dharmadhatu. When you own a Dharmadhatu at home, how do you take care of it? This chapter discusses the famous three natures of the Yogacara tradition, which is a way of further subtlety in understanding the two truths and the results of the fundamental change of the Alaya consciousness in the afflicted mind during enlightenment.
Oh, it's a change, huh?
Yeah, one of the most difficult topics to understand and also talk about, because the whole issue of, as Cynthia immediately picked up on, is there a change, is sort of to be debated. Teaching the Dharma in terms of motivation, usefulness, and uselessness. Perfection of teaching, differentiation of various intentions, flexible intention, teaching benefit. The practice of bodhisattvas in all these different characteristics, instructions and directions, the culmination of the training bodhisattvas, in order to bring the paths of seeing and familiarization to their culmination to purify. So one thing, hopefully, that you come away with from this review of the contents of these books is that you understand what the two obscurations to enlightenment are and what the five paths are, and generally like what they are about. And that alone would be well worth going through this. Lastly, sort of 15, the bodhisattva activity in terms of skillful means. Then we have the six paramijas, aspects of the six paramijas, and then we have worship, service, and the immeasurables. The worship of the Buddha, services to one's spiritual friend, and the four immeasurables. Interesting terminology, interesting content, worship, and service. 18, detailed presentation on the 37 factors of awakening, this famous scheme that the Dharma is summarized into, and the five paths is summarized into, the four foundations of mindfulness, the four correct efforts, four limbs of miraculous powers, all three of which are the path of accumulation. Then we have the five faculties, and the five powers is the path of preparation. Then the seven branches of awakening is the path of seeing, and then the eightfold path happens on the path of familiarization, strangely enough. Let's see, the many wondrous qualities of bodhisattvas that they use in an impartial manner in order to benefit and guide sentient beings through the six paramitas and so on, distinguishes between fake and genuine bodhisattva qualities, and how bodhisattvas investigate phenomena, fully comprehend true reality, practice the four immeasurables, and receive the prophecy of Buddhahood, which I spoke about earlier. Let's see, the fruition of the teachings, greatness of Mahayana, and so forth. 2021, establishing conduct, present the signs of being a bodhisattva, the roles of householder, mendicant, attention to bodhisattvas, how they care for beings, how they're reborn. These chapters discuss 11 bhumis, what bodhisattvas train on, through them, and so forth. And chapter 21 consists of verses of praise for the many qualities of a Buddha. And that concludes the second of the five texts. And we'll pause there.
How long
Any
is that?
comments?
But just, yes, question, that text, how long is it? Any idea?
Yeah, well, he said it was like 876 stanzas, where I think he used the word verses. And verses are usually 4 lines. that are not always full sentences. It's often like one or two sentences chopped into 4 lines, right? Um, you have the Prajnaparamita in 750 stanzas. Um, the hard part is about it is that um, there's no decent translation of it that I know of that presents just the text. There's two wonderful translations of it that come along with the commentaries of um, Mipam and Kempo Shenga that are enormous. They surpass even the tomes produced by Karl Brunholzl. Um, so it's hard to say. Like I said, the Abhismayalankar was like 30 pages. I would estimate it's like in the range of 100, 120 pages, something like that. But it could be like 80 pages.
But it doesn't actually exist in a way that we could get that.
Yeah, I've been trying to find that, and there's an archaic translation of it that's sort of not worth uh, trying to extract. Um, and then oh my God, there's a translation by Robert Thurman that uses such bizarre language it's totally useless. He translates deities as angels.
And the only reason I asked is, like you said, there were some chapters that sounded really cool, and so it was like, yeah, I'd like to read that one.
Yeah, well, I could extract those chapters from the those large ones that have commentary, and commentary in that chapter wouldn't be bad. It'd be neat to look at that in some context.
Yeah, I thought 9 and 11 sounded, well, there were lots that sounded good, but
11 had the fundamental change, right?
oh, that might have been, yes, yes, it did. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So those two chapters would be neat to look at.
at
Yeah.
least, yeah. Anyway, thanks.
Well, thank you, everyone. Nice to see you, and I hope to see you again soon. Let's conclude with our dedication. I think everybody knows our dedication here, right? By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. May the dark ignorance of all beings be misspelled. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you.
Thanks,
Thank
Derek.
you.
It
Take
was not
care.
boring. It's very
Good,
Right.
good. I love this stuff also. Good.
thank you.
That's good to hear. Take care.
Bye.